Probably the most important core memory I think I've ever had was in fourth grade elementary school. And just for context, before I get into this story takes place in an alternative school that I was put in. And the reason why I was put in that alternative school was because during my first, second, and third years in elementary school, I went to the same regular elementary school. And I was a bad kid, like pretty bad. During my third year specifically, I remember when I was in class, I threw pencils at this one girl. And yeah, I threw a pencil at her because I was angry. And also I also just like did other stuff. Like I was always screaming, yelling at the teachers, just basically just being a reckless kid. And it got to a point when the teachers and staff at that school basically just said they were done with me. So they sent me to, I don't actually, looking back on it, I don't actually think it was an alternative school because it was like a regular elementary school, but it just had like a sub kind of category. It just had like a sub part of it that was specifically for like special needs students and just like bad kids. And they put me they put me in a class with like 700 kids. And it wasn't a special needs class. It was more of like a anger management elementary class, I guess you could say, because all the kids in there that I were in with were really, really bad kids. Like some of the stuff they did was just crazy. I didn't know their backstories, but throughout the time that I was in that class, I definitely knew why they were put in that class. Because some of the stuff they did was kind of crazy. This one kid, I don't remember his exact name. I think it was Richard. I remember he was like really bad. He threw tables, chairs. He hit teachers. He hit other students. Luckily, he did not hit me because I never pissed him off. But yeah, he did some pretty crazy stuff. And then there was another kid in there. I don't remember his name. He was like some blonde-haired kid. He was just off the hooks crazy. Like I genuinely think he probably had some mental issues. But yeah, that basically just gives you a pretty good perspective on why so many bad kids, why that class was just crazy. But yeah, let me get to the story. It was fourth grade. One day, I don't know the day of the week, but I remember what we were doing that day was we were doing stations. Two kids were at the computer, another three were up front with the first teacher. Oh yeah, let me mention the teachers real quick. We had one teacher named Miss Bella, and then we had another teacher. His name was Mr. Moyer. He was a pretty big fat guy, but no, but he was a pretty cool guy looking back on it. But he he didn't play when kids were getting bad. When a kid was getting bad and like started like throwing chairs and stuff. Oh, I remember seeing him just going up to that kid, grabbing him, just lifting him up, and just putting him in the timeout room. Yeah, our class had a freaking timeout room. They would put you in this room until you calm down, and then they take you out. Gosh, that room was scary. Glad I never got put in that room. But anyways, back to the story. We had stations that day. Two were at the computer. Two were up front with Miss Bella learning something, and then me and two other kids were at a round table in the far right corner of the classroom, and we were doing some kind of like math bingo cards or something like that. We had like addition problems, subtraction problems, multiplication problems just on the cards, and he would just hand us the cards, and we would have to like solve them and stuff. But then I remember at the very end of that lesson, he grabbed four pieces of paper for all of us, and I remember he each gave us the piece of paper, and he just said, "Rip the paper into however many pieces you want. Just go haywire on it." And I was just like, okay. So I did. I went haywire on it and started ripping that paper into just so many small, tiny little pieces. So did the other kids. They were going haywire on it too. And then I remember at the very end of that, I remember he said to us, "Now put the paper back together." And I was like, "Oh, oh crap," because that paper was just in shambles, and there was no way I was gonna be able to put that paper back together. And so other kids were looking at each other the same way. And I remember I was so desperately trying to put it back together. I was grabbing glue, tape, anything I could find to just make it at least somewhat resemble its original form. And then at the very end of that, once we basically all just gave up and couldn't put it back together, he said, "Now, what did we learn, guys?" And I didn't know at the time what we learned. So he just told us the answer, and the answer was, when you let your anger lash out, it can do irreversible stuff that you can't fix. And looking back on that, that made a lot of sense. When you lash out and do stuff without thinking first, it can lead to consequences that you can't repair. And it can lead to deep regrets that you regret. And looking back on it, it made a lot of sense. We were all put in that class because we were bad kids. Of course, some kids being worse than others, but I was in there for a reason too. I was a pretty bad kid, had anger issues. And from that day on, it really taught me how to manage my anger and not just lash out at every single minor inconvenience. Just taught me how to accept stuff, and it taught me how to know what consequences can happen if I do certain stuff. Taught me, basic moral principles, But yeah, that moment in my in fourth grade elementary was probably the most influential moment of my childhood. I don't think there's anything else that can really come up with that. It taught me a very valuable lesson, and yeah. But one thing I really would wish, looking back on it, is I wish I could go back to that day, back in time to that day, and whenever Mr. Moyer told us to basically just go haywire on the paper, instead of going haywire on it, I would have just wanted the day and just rip it in half, just the paper, just rip it in half, so then it would be a lot easier to tape it or glue it back together. Basically, just show him my growth, I guess you could say, my personal growth. I think Mr. Moore would have been proud of me if I'd only ripped it in half. But yeah, that pretty much sums up that little story that I remembered from my childhood. So yeah, see ya.